Well, I just got back from seeing the Black Panther movie, and I want to talk about it. Now, just a bit of fair warning, my experience with Black Panther as a character is relatively limited, especially compared to some of the other superheroes I've talked about in reviews. I know the basic history of his character. I know some of the big stuff that he's involved in the comics, some of which he may eventually become involved in the MCU as well, especially now that Disney has acquired Fox. The most exposure I ever had to the character was the Earth's Mightiest Hero cartoon, and this movie and Civil War. But I have to say, even with what little experience I've had with the character, I've always found him fascinating. Of all the various super advanced hidden cities in comic books, Black Panther, T'Challa's homeland of Wakanda is one of the most interesting, by a pretty wide margin. You've got this ultra advanced country that very few people know anything about, with this ridiculous science fiction level of technology. And there are characters out there like Tony Stark who come close to matching that level of technology. But Wakanda has had this level of technology for a long freaking time, by the standards of the rest of the world. A long freaking time. And yet they still respect their past, they still respect their traditions. Wakanda is kind of a model for the way that a futuristic society could be, a futuristic Earth society could be. Sort of an idealized version. And dropping it smack dab into the middle of the Marvel Universe has big implications for that universe in whatever form it takes. Finally, adding the character of Black Panther to the MCU and adding Wakanda to the MCU changes everything, and I'm super excited about it just on principle alone for those reasons. For a long time, I was worried that Black Panther was a character we weren't going to get in the movies. And I was worried that even if we did, we weren't going to get any solo movies for him. And thankfully, I was wrong, because this movie was really good. Now, I don't think it was perfect. It wasn't an absolutely amazing 10 out of 10. It was still a Marvel movie. It still had flaws. It was vastly enjoyable and very well made, but it had flaws. But I actually found flaws in it in very specific points. So let's go over the areas where I didn't have any problems with it first. I think the best part of this movie by far was the cast. The cast was amazing. Everyone in this movie was fantastic, and no one character really carried the whole thing. Watching this movie, you almost don't feel like there's a main character and then a supporting cast, with a few exceptions. The core group of characters in this movie felt almost like an ensemble, which I thought was really neat. But some standouts did include the character of T'Challa. His little sister was fantastic too. This movie had a bit more of a harsh and serious tone than some Marvel stuff, so they used her. She's also kind of his tech advisor. They used her and all of the tech stuff she was doing is kind of the comic relief in the movie. And she had a tendency to steal the show in weaker scenes. And the eventual main villain of this movie, and I'm not going to spoil who that is in case you guys don't know, was really fantastic as well. Such a charismatic character that even though he was the bad guy, there were entire scenes where I was actually rooting for him to win. Despite myself, I was rooting for him to win. The design of Wakanda was fantastic. The way that scenes in this movie were shot and staged, you show these broad, sweeping views of Wakandan landscapes, cityscapes, were just great. It was kind of like the first views of Asgard we got in the first Thor movie, where it's difficult imagining what that place might look like in real life. And just like Asgard in that first Thor movie, I think they did a fantastic job of realizing Wakanda on the big screen in a way that was fantastical but also grounded. Stuff with Black Panther and his powers was really well realized. The look and feel of the Wakandan tech was really well realized. And while it did feel in line with some of the other stuff we've seen in the MCU, it felt different enough that it was distinguishable. All of their tech is based on vibranium, the metal that Captain America's shield is made from. I think it's like 1 part vibranium in the comics, but I'm pretty sure it's like completely vibranium in the movies. Their tech is all based around this really powerful metal. They are the only country in the world that has a surplus of it. And so all of their tech has this really cool, like, kind of purplish, bluish vibranium glow. Their weapons were cool. Black Panther gets a new suit in this that was really spectacular. Action scenes were very well staged. All of the fights in this were really well choreographed. Overall, I liked most of the stuff that it delivered. But just like another recent superhero movie that I really enjoyed overall, the Wonder Woman movie, I do feel like this movie has some very glaring problems. They're small when compared with all the good that this movie does, but they do exist and they do detract from the experience. It's actually kind of fitting that I find myself comparing this to the Wonder Woman movie, because the overall theme of the two movies are actually pretty similar. In both of them, you have a warrior of royal descent who hails from a country hidden away from the rest of the world, who ventures out from their country to deal with a threat that they feel is their responsibility to deal with. There is a reveal of the real villain. There's a war element. There's an ancient warriors element, as the aesthetic of the warrior characters in Black Panther was very old-fashioned, even if their tech wasn't. And at the end, the title character stands to become potentially a new beacon of hope for the entire world. And so I think it's kind of fitting that one of the main issues that I had with this movie is an issue that it shares with the Wonder Woman movie. The climax in this movie, just like the climax in Wonder Woman, with this big fight with a bunch of participants going on in the background while the main hero fights against the main villain. And just like the scene in Wonder Woman, there was a lot of CG used in this scene. There were a lot of CG people that weren't quite realistic enough for me to buy it. There are some CG creatures in this too that weren't entirely convincing, and even, weirdly enough, a few CG set pieces that I didn't find entirely convincing either, which is odd because Marvel usually does inanimate stuff and tech stuff really super well. Though the special effects in the final battle scene in this movie were better than the special effects in the final battle scene of Wonder Woman. Marvel's CG just seems to be better than DC CG. That's not really the worst thing. It's just something that I feel like I have to factor into my reviews because I do notice it and it does take me out of the experience. My other main issue with the movie, though, I think is of a bit more importance, and that's that the pacing of this movie was just too fast. Like, I can understand if you want to make your movie super fast-paced because it services the story to do so. But the Black Panther movie had its pacing turned up to 11, not because it really serviced the story to do so, but because they just had too much story to tell. There was probably 2.5 movies worth of story crammed into this one movie. It felt like multiple movies smashed together. You have the whole backstory for the character who ends up being the main villain of the movie. That entire story could have been told as its own movie with just a little bit more fleshing out. Then you have the initial main villain of the movie, who was also, I think, probably the only character in this movie that I didn't actually like too much. But if he had been written differently and given more to work with, especially considering how important a villain he is in the comics, they certainly could have made an entire movie about his story as well. And then, of course, the real main villain of the movie, they certainly could have done a lot more with him and gotten an entire movie out of that as well. And I feel like this stems from the fact that Black Panther was introduced so late in the narrative of the MCU. It really does seem like Marvel Studios just took too long to commit to making movies about the character, and now they want him to be at the same place as all the other characters that they've established over multiple movies, and in order to do that they have to cram multiple movies worth of stories all into one movie so he can play catch up. I feel like that's unfair to the character, and it did take away from the movie for me. Still, everything else about this movie is great, and despite the really fast pacing and the, I think, disjointed stories, it does still work. It's not like things don't make sense or anything. It's just, it's irksome. To me, you might not even have the same problem with it that I do. So don't take this complaint as an indication that you shouldn't go see the movie, because you absolutely should. It's very good. Like, I don't think it's the best Marvel movie yet or anything, but it's definitely high up there. In fact, and this is actually pretty fitting, considering that I was comparing it to Wonder Woman earlier, I actually rank it about the same. Kind of a high 7 or a low 8, which is very high on my rating scale, considering that the highest that I typically rate things is a 9. I will admit that Wonder Woman kind of stands out more in my mind when I think back on the two, to continue this comparison beyond the point that I probably should. But I think that's more because Wonder Woman is legitimately the best DCEU movie up to this point, whereas this is not the best that the MCU has to offer. Alright, after taking a second to make some more room on my camera, because I forgot that I filled my memory card, having just aired my grievances with the movie, I do want to end on a positive note, because I did enjoy this movie. So I do want to briefly talk about the sort of underlying message of this movie, as spoiler-free as I can, considering that the endgame villain of the movie is supposed to be a surprise. This is a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, so it is in part made for kids. Kids are supposed to be able to watch this movie without a problem. And yet, the villain ended up actually having good points. His actions, to a point, were even kind of justified. And his goals were good goals. He just went about accomplishing them the wrong way. It sort of carries on from one of Black Panther's themes in Civil War. In Civil War, his motivation was that he wanted to get revenge for the death of his father. But as the events of the movie played out, he was faced with the nuance of the situation and made a different choice. Here, he is also faced with the nuance of the situation, learns from it, grows from it, and makes a significant choice which changes his future. And the future of all his people. It's pretty cool to see. Overall, this was a very solid Marvel movie. If you like Marvel movies, you're going to like it, as I said before. But, as per usual, guys, I would like to know, what did you think of Black Panther if you have seen it? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or on my Discord. Link in the description. Either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.